There are battles that decide kings, and there are battles that destroy entire empires. On April 11, 1241, European knights galloped in pursuit of what they believed to be a defeated enemy. Mongols in retreat, fleeing in disorder. Victory seemed certain. What they did not know would cost them everything. For centuries, heavy European cavalry had dominated medieval battlefields. Knights clad in steel armor, mounted on trained war horses, formed an almost invincible force. Lance after lance, charge after charge, European armies swept aside everything in their path. The mere sight of knights in attack formation was enough to shatter the morale of entire armies. It was a supremacy built over generations, an unshakable conviction. Nothing could stop a charge of European cavalry. But in the spring of 1241, that certainty would be tested devastatingly. The Mongols arrived at Hungary's borders as a phenomenon Europe had never faced before. A coordinated invasion on two fronts, commanded by Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, advanced like an unstoppable wave through Central Europe. From the east, tens of thousands of Mongol horsemen swept across the Hungarian plains. From the north, another Mongol army penetrated Poland. It was a campaign synchronized with military precision that no European kingdom had thought possible. In command of the Mongol forces was Subutai, a name that should have chilled the blood of any commander who knew his reputation. Subutai was considered one of the greatest tactical geniuses in military history. He had conquered more territories than any general before him. He had orchestrated campaigns across impossible distances. He had destroyed armies that outnumbered him. And most importantly, he had perfected the art of psychological warfare. But King Bela IV of Hungary saw no threat in these steppe invaders. To Hungarian commanders, the Mongols were merely mounted archers, nomadic warriors from Asia who relied on small horses and bows. How could such forces pose any real threat to heavy European cavalry? Hungarian knights wore armor that arrows couldn't easily penetrate. They wielded long swords and lances that could shatter enemy formations. They rode war horses bred specifically for mounted combat. The logic seemed clear. In direct confrontation, European cavalry would overwhelm these nomadic archers. This arrogance wasn't unfounded. It was the result of centuries of undefeated victories. Medieval Europe had built its entire military doctrine around the supremacy of heavy cavalry. Castles, fortifications, siege tactics. Everything was designed with the armored knight as the ultimate weapon. No European army had ever encountered a force capable of breaking a coordinated cavalry charge in open field. The Mongols knew this perfectly, and Subutai planned to use that confidence as a weapon. 2 days before the battle that would occur in Hungary, on April 9, 1241, another Mongol army employed the exact same tactic in Poland. At the Battle of Legnica, Polish knights pursued Mongols who appeared to be in retreat. Duke Henry II of Poland led the pursuit personally. It was a trap. The Mongol cavalry suddenly turned. Ambush forces emerged from the flanks. The Duke was killed. His army was annihilated. Europe did not learn of this in time. Communication between kingdoms was slow. News from Legnica would not reach Hungary before it was too late. When Mongol forces made initial contact with the Hungarian army near the Mohi River, King Bela IV had established solid defensive positions. He had numbers on his side. Tens of thousands of Hungarian soldiers, including elite heavy cavalry, experienced infantry, and support from allied units. The terrain was favorable. Supply lines were secure. Everything suggested the Hungarians could repel any Mongol attack. Mongol light cavalry began probing attacks. Small groups of mounted archers would approach, fire a few arrows, and withdraw quickly. It was a harassing tactic, common among steppe warriors. Hungarian commanders saw this as confirmation of their suspicions. The Mongols lacked the courage or ability for direct confrontation. They were cowards who relied on hit-and-run tactics and retreats. Then came the moment Subutai had been waiting for. During one of the probing attacks, when Mongol cavalry was pressed by the Hungarian response, something happened. The Mongols began to retreat, not in an organized manner. They appeared to be fleeing, their formation scattered. Mongol horsemen galloped in apparent retreat, glancing back as if terrified. For Hungarian commanders, it was the signal they'd been waiting for. The Mongols were breaking. The first real pressure had revealed their weakness. If they pursued now, they could turn that retreat into total annihilation. They could destroy the invading forces before they regrouped. It was an opportunity that couldn't be missed. A debate arose among Hungarian officers. Some advised caution. The defensive positions were solid. Why abandon them to pursue an enemy in retreat? Others argued the opposite. If they let the Mongols escape, they might return stronger. The opportunity to crush the invaders was there now. Hesitation would be cowardly. Pride won out over prudence. The decision was made. Pursue. The Hungarian cavalry would mount and hunt down the fleeing Mongols. They would turn the retreat into a bloodbath. They would prove, once and for all, the superiority of European cavalry over these nomadic warriors. Orders were given. The Hungarian knights mounted. The infantry was instructed to follow as soon as possible. The defensive positions were abandoned. The formation began to move toward the open field, following the Mongols who appeared to be fleeing in increasing disorder. As the pursuit advanced, something began to happen. The fastest units of Hungarian cavalry began to pull ahead of the slower ones. The younger, more eager knights galloped ahead, determined to reach the Mongols first. The support infantry fell further and further back. The formation, which had been tight in the defensive positions, began to stretch out, to break apart. The Mongols maintained perfect distance, close enough to keep the Hungarians pursuing, far enough to avoid being caught. It was as if they were measuring exactly how much space they needed, as if each step of the retreat was calculated. Because it was. Kilometers behind, the Hungarian fortifications now stood empty. There was no defensive line to fall back to. The Hungarian knights were completely exposed in open field. Their formations were stretched thin. Their support units were separated. And they kept advancing, growing ever more convinced that victory was within reach. Subutai watched it all from an elevated vantage point. Decades of military experience had taught him how to exploit human nature, pride, the hunger for glory, the certainty of superiority. All of this could be weaponized against his enemies. And now, the Hungarian army was exactly where he wanted them. As the Hungarian cavalry advanced across the open field, as their formations dangerously extended, as Hungarian commanders shouted orders to catch the fleeing Mongols, Subutai's trap was closing. What would happen next would change European warfare forever. The pursuit continued. Deeper into the open field, the cavalry units in front, equipped with heavy armor and mounted on war horses, accelerated faster and faster. Behind them, the infantry units and supply convoys struggled to keep pace. The formation stretched. The fastest knights now were hundreds of meters ahead. The support units fell further and further behind, and the defensive fortifications they had abandoned. Kilometers back, there was no defensive line to fall back to. The Mongols, apparently in flight, maintained perfect distance. Not so far that the Hungarians would abandon the pursuit. Not so close that they seemed to be regrouping. It was a controlled retreat, calculated. But to the Hungarian commanders, it looked exactly like what they expected to see. A defeated enemy fleeing in panic. What they didn't know was that retreat had a name. The feigned retreat. It wasn't panic. It was a choreographed trap. To retreat under fire, maintaining perfect formation and precise speed to lure the enemy, required a level of discipline that no European army possessed. The Hungarians thought they were hunting, but they were being herded. It was psychological warfare in its purest form. Subutai understood human psychology better than most military commanders of his age. He knew that pride was a vulnerability, certainty of superiority, an exploitable weakness, the hunger for glory, an open door to destruction. And European knights, with centuries of military supremacy behind them, carried all these vulnerabilities in abundance. European cavalry had dominated battlefields for generations. Heavily armored knights mounted on trained war horses. They'd crushed enemies throughout Europe. They'd never tasted defeat from true opponents, and certainly not from mounted archers coming from the Asian steppes. This arrogance was exactly what Subutai counted on. He had used this same tactic in dozens of campaigns, from China to Persia, from Russia to the borders of Europe. And it worked every time, because it exploited human nature, the need to win, the certainty that the fleeing enemy was vulnerable, the impulse to pursue, to finish the fight, to claim victory. And the Hungarians were falling into Subutai's trap exactly as he had planned. As the Hungarian cavalry continued advancing, as their formations dangerously extended across the open field, As their support units fell further and further away, Subutai coordinated his movements with surgical precision. Multiple units of Mongol cavalry executed the retreat in perfect synchronization. It wasn't chaos. It was military choreography at its finest. Each unit maintained precise distances. Each commander followed exact signals. Flags raised, hand gestures, coordinated timing. This was what separated Mongol forces from most European armies: seamless battlefield communication. And while the Mongol cavalry fled, other forces moved into position. Mounted archers shifted to the flanks, hidden by terrain features, wooded areas, ground elevations, positions along the river. They didn't attack, not yet. They only watched the Hungarian column stretch thinner and thinner. They waited for the signal. Ambush forces remained completely hidden. Mongol cavalry concealed in tree lines, units positioned behind natural ridges. They'd studied the terrain carefully. They knew exactly where to hide, where to wait, where to strike. The Hungarians had no idea they were being encircled. This coordination was Subutai's genius. He wasn't just commanding an army. He was orchestrating a symphony of destruction. Each unit knew its role. Each commander understood the timing. Everything converged toward a single point, the moment of the turn. It was a coordinated invasion. Two Mongol armies, two simultaneous fronts, both employing the same deception strategy. European military doctrine had no counter for it. Because European doctrine was built on a simple principle: cavalry always advances. Cavalry always charges. Cavalry never retreats as a tactic. The Mongols turned that certainty into a deadly trap. The Hungarian formation was now dangerously stretched. The cavalry units at the front, accelerated by the adrenaline of pursuit, had created an enormous gap with the rest of the army. The infantry was far behind, the supplies even farther. The cohesion of formation had completely disintegrated. It was exactly what Subutai expected. From his elevated position, he observed everything. Decades of military experience had taught him when the moment was right, when the enemy was vulnerable, when the trap was ready to close. And now, that moment had arrived. The signal was given, and the Mongol cavalry, which had been fleeing for kilometers, suddenly stopped. Not gradually, not in chaos. In perfect synchronization, the Mongol units slowed, wheeled their horses around, and reformed into attack formation. In seconds, the defeated refugees transformed into a coordinated military force bearing down directly on their Hungarian pursuers. The turn was so swift, so precise, that the Hungarian commanders didn't have time to comprehend what was happening. One moment, they were chasing a fleeing enemy. The next, they were facing an organized battle formation. Understanding came slowly. Then, all at once, they had been deceived. There was no Mongol panic, no defeat, no flight, only a trap, and they'd walked directly into it. The psychological impact was instant. Hungarian commanders who seconds before were shouting pursuit orders now froze. Certainty of victory transformed into ice-cold dread. The adrenaline of pursuit transformed into spreading panic, because they understood, finally, the terrible truth of their situation. They were in open field. Their formations were destroyed. Their support units were too far away. There were no fortifications, no defensive terrain, no line of retreat, and the enemy they thought was defeated was now attacking. But the turn of the Mongol cavalry was only the beginning. While the Hungarians tried to process what was happening, while they tried to regroup their shattered formations, while commanders shouted contradictory orders, the Mongol mounted archers emerged from their positions on the flanks. Hundreds of them, on both sides of the stretched Hungarian column. And they began to fire. It wasn't random fire. These were coordinated barrages. Waves of arrows launched from multiple angles by mounted archers riding at full gallop. Arrows rained down like a deadly storm. The heavy armor of the Hungarian knights offered some protection, but not against this volume, not against this angle, and not when the horses were targets too. The war horses began to panic. Arrows struck their flanks, their necks, their legs. Animals trained for battle now screamed in pain and fear. Some collapsed, others reared, throwing their riders to the ground. Others bolted uncontrollably, carrying their riders away from formation. The unit's cohesion, already broken by the stretched pursuit, was now completely collapsing. Hungarian commanders shouted orders to form defensive positions. But in open field, under attack from all sides, Without support units, the orders were nearly impossible to execute. European military doctrine had no answer for this. Because European doctrine assumed cavalry battles meant frontal charges. Force against force. Not this mobility. Not this multi-directional encirclement. Not this psychological warfare. And then, while the arrows continued to fall, while the Hungarian formation disintegrated into chaos, Subutais' ambush forces made their move. From wooded areas, from behind ridges, from hidden positions across the terrain, Mongol cavalry units that had been completely concealed now emerged. And attacked. Not from the front. From the flanks. From the sides. From the rear. From directions the Hungarians weren't prepared to defend because they never saw it coming. The stretched Hungarian column was now being attacked from all sides. The cavalry that had turned was at the front. The mounted archers on the flanks. The ambush forces attacking from the rear. And in the midst of it all, Hungarian knights desperately trying to form any kind of coordinated defense. But coordinated defense requires communication, requires intact formations, requires support units, requires defensible terrain. The Hungarians had none of these. They had open field, broken formations, support units miles away, and enemies attacking from every direction. The retreat route had been cut off. The rear ambush forces ensured that. There was no escape route, no way to fall back to the fortifications they had abandoned. They were trapped. And Subutai was not finished. What had started as a confident pursuit had transformed into a slaughter. Hungarian knights, who minutes before believed they were chasing a beaten enemy, now fought only to survive. Pride had turned into terror. Certainty of victory had turned into desperation, and Subutai's trap continued to tighten. Decades of military experience, years of Mongol cavalry training, meticulous studies of terrain, deep understanding of human psychology, all converging toward this moment, toward this battle, toward this destruction. The Hungarians had thought they were hunting, but from the first moment of contact, they were the prey. And now, surrounded in open field, with no escape route and no reinforcements, they finally understood the truth. They were not in a battle. They were in an execution. Hungarian knights attempted desperate counterattacks. Isolated cavalry groups charged against the Mongols, trying to break the encirclement. But in complete chaos, without central command, without formation discipline, each charge was pointless. The mounted Mongol archers simply fell back, maintained distance, and continued unleashing arrows at the attackers. Heavy armor offered some protection, but horses panicked. Animals wounded by arrows began throwing their riders. The Hungarian formation, once fearsome, was now just a desperate cluster of men fighting for their individual lives. The Hungarian command structure had completely collapsed. Officers shouted conflicting orders. Some ordered retreat, others demanded attacks. But in open field, surrounded by Mongol forces on all sides, no order mattered. The coordination that had made European cavalry so fearsome for centuries simply ceased to exist. And without coordination, Hungarian knights were just isolated targets. And then, a terrible realization spread through Hungarian ranks like fire across dry grass. There was no possible escape. The Mongols were offering no way out. There was no negotiation. There was no surrender option. Subutai had designed this as complete annihilation, and every Mongol movement executed that plan with chilling precision. The Hungarian army was being destroyed as an organized force. What had started as a confident pursuit of a fleeing enemy had become an unprecedented slaughter. Historical estimates of Hungarian casualties vary widely, ranging from 30,000 to 100,000 men, depending on the source. The exact number remains debated, but one thing is absolutely certain. It was a military catastrophe of staggering proportions. One of the greatest military disasters medieval Europe had ever suffered. And King Bela IV? The supreme commander of Hungarian forces, the man who had ordered the pursuit of the fleeing Mongols? He was forced to flee the battlefield. He abandoned his collapsing army and escaped with his life barely intact. In the months that followed, Bela was forced to temporarily abandon Hungary itself, fleeing the Mongol invasion that now marched freely through the devastated kingdom. For the Mongols, the tactical victory was total. Minimal losses. Complete destruction of the enemy. Subutai had turned Hungarian confidence into a trap. European pride into tactical vulnerability, and a battle into a demonstration of military genius so complete that it would echo throughout Europe. But the true damage at the Mohi River wasn't just military, it was psychological. For centuries, European heavy cavalry had been viewed as the supreme military force of the Western world. Armored knights charging in formation were considered virtually unstoppable. This wasn't just military doctrine, it was cultural pride. It was identity. And on April 11, 1241, at the Mohi River, that belief was destroyed. European commanders across Christendom received the news from Hungary in utter shock. It wasn't just that an army had been defeated. It was how they'd been defeated. Deceived. Manipulated. Led into a trap by their own assumptions of superiority. European cavalry hadn't been beaten by raw force. They'd been beaten by mobility, deception, and tactical coordination. By intelligence. And the Mongols hadn't used this tactic just once. 2 days before the Mohi River, on April 9, 1241, at the Battle of Legnica in Poland, Mongol forces executed exactly the same playbook. Feigned retreat, European pursuit, sudden turnaround, devastating ambush. Duke Henry II of Poland was killed in that battle. His head was mounted on a Mongol lance after the victory. 2 battles, 2 days apart, coordinated invasion on 2 fronts, dual application of the same tactical deception. This was not luck. This was not improvisation. It was a military campaign orchestrated by Subutai, with a level of tactical sophistication that the European military establishment simply had no answer for. Medieval Europe learned a harsh lesson in April 1241. Pride and brute force don't win wars. Psychology wins wars. Understanding your enemy wins wars. Tactical adaptability wins wars. And that lesson forced major changes in European military doctrine. In the years and decades after 1241, European commanders had to study Mongol tactics. For the first time, they realized that psychological warfare mattered, that mobility mattered, that terrain mattered, that tactical flexibility mattered. The old approach, heavy cavalry charging straight into any enemy, simply didn't work anymore. Situational awareness, understanding terrain, the ability to read enemy behavior, these became strategic priorities. The frontal cavalry charge as military doctrine began to disappear at the Mohi River. And in its place, a more sophisticated approach to warfare emerged. Strategic intelligence beats brute force. And Subutai, the mastermind behind it all? He's recognized today as one of the greatest tactical minds in military history. His name appears in history books alongside Alexander the Great, Hannibal, and Napoleon. The feigned retreat he executed at the Mohi River became a textbook case study in military academies worldwide. A perfect example of how to weaponize enemy psychology against them. Subutai understood something profound about human nature. Pride can be weaponized. Overconfidence is a strategic weakness. And if you understand how your enemy thinks, if you know what he expects, you can turn those expectations against him. You can make the enemy's own mindset your battlefield. At the Mohi River, Subutai proved that the most dangerous commander isn't the one with the biggest army. It's the one who understands human psychology. The immediate aftermath of 1241 was catastrophic for Central Europe. Hungary lay in ruins. The kingdoms of Central Europe descended into panic. The path for Mongol invasion was wide open. If Batu Khan's forces had kept marching west, they could have reached the heart of Europe virtually unopposed. Then, something unexpected happened. The great Khan of the Mongols, Ogadai, died. A succession crisis tore apart the Mongol Empire. Batu Khan was forced to pull his forces back and head east to participate in the succession struggle. The invasion of Western Europe was stopped not by military victory, but by Mongol internal politics. Europe got lucky. Very lucky. Because in 1241, it became painfully obvious that no European kingdom had an effective military counter to Mongol tactics. But the long-term impact of the Mohi River went far beyond just changing borders. It fundamentally transformed how Europeans understood warfare. April 11, 1241 became a turning point in European military history, not just because of the devastation that day, but because of the lesson written in blood on that battlefield. The lesson that technological superiority and brute force aren't enough. That psychology, deception, and understanding your opponent are as powerful as swords and horses. The legacy of Mongol tactical innovation continued to shape military strategy for centuries to come. Military commanders studied Subutai's campaigns, analyzed his methods, tried to figure out how he coordinated such huge forces with such precision. The feigned retreat especially became a tactic that commanders studied, copied, and respected in battles around the world. And the core lesson of the Mohi River, the fundamental truth that Subutai grasped so perfectly, is still relevant today in modern military strategy. Your enemy's assumptions are the real battlefield. If you can control what your opponent expects, you control what they'll do. And if you control what they do, you've already won before the battle even starts. At the Mohi River, European cavalry learned a hard lesson. Learned that centuries of military superiority could be erased in one afternoon by an enemy who thought differently, who fought differently, who understood that battles are won in the mind long before they're decided on the field. And that lesson was written in blood. If you're fascinated by tactical brilliance and battles that changed history, drop a comment. What other battles show how strategy beats raw power? Military history is packed with moments where intelligence defeated strength, where deception defeated numbers. I want to explore more of these stories with you. If you enjoyed this tactical breakdown of the Mohi River, if you want more content about the moments when strategic genius changed the course of history, give it a like and subscribe, because there's so much more to discover about how brilliant minds turned the impossible into reality. At the Mohi River, on April 11, 1241, Europe learned that cavalry invincibility was a myth, and the lesson was written in blood.